Stack?
Yes, sir.
Jimmy?
Jimmy, how you doing, buddy?
Not bad. How about yourself?
Doing well, thank
Pleasure.
you.
I must say, grew up in Philadelphia, skateboarding, obviously huge art scene there, but those regular trips in New York were status quo, Chinatown bus up, hit a gang of stores, obviously your stores.
Appreciate that very much.
Stops, so
thank you very much.
It's a pleasure to sit with you. I guess the first question today, LES, New York as a whole, breeding ground for talented street artists like yourself. If you could just give me a little background, how you grew up, how you came up, you know, just in...
I mean, for me, I got introduced to graffiti art by taking the subways to school. And my early memories are just that first day where you're allowed to go on your own, you got your own viewpoint. You weren't with your parents, you weren't, you know, that first Philadelphia style of getting out there and getting on the train. I started seeing the graffiti really, I think, for the first time. And that really just captivated me and just never left. So it was really, you know, the subway movement is what captivated me. And at the same time, in the early 80s, there was a lot of really young street art kind of coming up in the East Village, and a lot of artists that sort of wanted to emulate what the graffiti movement was doing on the train and the streets. So there was a, you know, you're getting it up and down, and I was totally receptive to all the visual stuff that I was seeing, and it really just had such a lasting effect on me.
And I guess at that time, were there particular artists that stood out to you that kind of resonated with you, or was it just like a plethora of art out there that really, you know?
I mean, I didn't know who was who, so it was a learning period for me. There was a period of time I remember taking, you know, again, a lot of it was taking the train, and my fascination with the insides, the writing, the calligraphy on the inside, not the muralization on the outside. So it was more like I would get on the train one day and I'd see a name and I'd recognize it. Yeah. Oh shit, I recognize the name. And so the next day, or even coming home the same day, I'd see the same name in a different color, in a different placement. So I started to be more fascinated, like, hey, what's that about? And so it just triggered the whole, one day at school, talking about graffiti, somebody's like, hey, my older brother goes to the yard to paint. What's a yard? So it was an amazing, not just to do the art, but a really kind of like, you know, like Fight Club, you know, Write Club. We didn't talk about it. You only spoke with other writers and sort of learned through that.
If was there a particular age that you remember it really clicking at, or just something that throughout your childhood that you just kind of developed into those early teenage years?
Yeah, it was the early teenage years for me, right? I'm 51, funny enough, and so my period in the New York City graffiti movement was after the explosion of what was known as like the pioneers, or the really early artists that sort of, you know, invented what we know as. And the developmental stages, I'm a little later in the game, so I had the fortunate time placement of seeing it develop, and my entry point just sort of really helped out a lot. And going back to your question about artists, I mean, there's so many artists that I could mention that we wouldn't have enough time.
Amazing, amazing.
Yeah.
You came up in a period pre-internet, pre-social media, pre-fucking a lot of stuff.
Our bombing was our branding, right?
Yeah.
Like our social media was like getting out in the world and physically writing on things or doing something.
So that's what I was going to ask. Could you speak to you know, what it was like coming up during that era where it wasn't directly to your computer, directly to your phone?
I mean, I look back and I think like, wow, what a blessing, because I would hate to be now.
Yeah.
You know, people don't make eye contact. There's a lot of stuff. So all of this is really great, interacting. And, you know, so for me, I don't think I'd be here doing what I'm doing if I started now with this way. It was, you know, we didn't have the luxury of sending a PDF. You know, we used to have fan mail, or you'd have pen pals.
Yeah.
And so you'd get a graffiti zine from Australia from some dude you met on a trip. It'd be all black and white, Xeroxed, even though you knew it was all color murals, but you'd look at style and, you know, hand styles, and it was just so real and exciting, you know? Yeah. And, you know, sometimes analog can be better than digital. Digital speeds time, but you lose the heritage and all the feeling and grit of it sometimes.
And as your art's getting more out there, more visibility, people are understanding who Stash is. In that era, there's obviously way more levels of, you're just way more anonymous, correct?
Correct.
So how did you exist seeing, you know, just seeing your name get bigger, more visible, but still having to play the background so much, you know?
That was probably the hardest part, the transition of, you know, as a graffiti artist, you didn't want to be seen or known except to other graffiti artists. Yeah. So for the public or the civilian, you wanted the anonymity, you know? Yeah. But then when it got commodified, people stepped out of the shadows because you wanted to claim, hey, I did that. That's me. I'm taking credit now because there's interest or we have something. So that was a bit of a transition for myself of just being able to sort of recognize and learn a new vernacular and how to communicate with the work I was doing then, but carrying it and maturing with it to a business or just even as so far as to organizing a mural project that was not in the middle of the night or illegal. That initial transition.
So that was going to be my next question. From a legal standpoint back then, I've heard war stories about New York City bringing full cases against artists.
They're still
in your
doing
time
it.
period.
Yeah.
The severity of it then compared to now, and like how did you manage to kind of move, you know what I mean, in between the cracks without falling victim of what I'm sure other artists have been.
Oh, the war stories go on. You know? It's out of control. I don't know how I managed. You know, just we do what we do, and it's part luck, part whatever it is. You know, but it was amazing just watching how they try to combat what we did. We were trying to advance what we did. It was definitely an amazing period in New York. I don't think as artists, like certainly the Elk where I came from, the school I came from, New York City graffiti artists, we have such a different training than just because of what the obstacles we had in front of us to just do the artwork. We just wanted to do the art. Climbing through fences, getting chased, all sort of sketchy shit in the middle of the night, or just a time period that was really sort of, you know, awkward. You know, you're painting in the dark, you're doing all sorts of stuff. But when I look back, it's the best training I could have ever had because I was interested, I was motivated, I was really inspired. I had a group of friends, and it was for us. Yeah. It's not like piano lessons where it's like, all right, go and learn, or whatever. It was more of a self-discovery. Yeah. And that, to me, is what's most exciting about looking back at that.
Was there, I guess this is a weird question, though, with knowing how much legal issues you could run into, and you're hearing this is a whole city, you know, there's a city versus an artist, it's the city versus this guy.
I mean, back then it was different, right?
But sleeping at night, were you ever just sitting there like, man, there could be 30 detectives working on it?
No, back then it wasn't like that, right? So, you know, it was like the pioneers of what was going on had already happened, so the movement was live and active, and, you know, the authorities were trying to figure out all the illegalities of where they're coming from, how they're painting it, but as artists, I didn't have the vision of that. I was just doing what I did. I was living with my parents. I didn't have as much to lose as an adult. So you bring the timeline now, I'd be scared as S to do any of it because all that I would have to lose, and I'm a parent and all these things, it's a different circumstance now. Back then, it was like, F everything, we're rebels, we're doing what we did. We didn't think about it, we acted. We just, you know, it was a movement. We call it a movement, we were moving.
So I guess my next question would be, were your parents fully aware what was going on with you, you know, during these adolescent years?
Yes and no. You know, you let them know what you needed them to know. They figured out. I mean, I grew up with a single mom, right? So on Father's Day, it's like, Happy Father's Day, Mom. You know, she's my life and the bomb. And, you know, I could lie to her any way I wanted to. She'd just know, you know. Whatever relationship you had, you know, with your parents, everybody knows. And my mom knew sort of what was going on, but I don't think to the extent of like climbing in tunnels and doing that. You know, they didn't know the mechanism. They just knew the outcome. Oh, you're painting on things. They didn't know that we were like on the elevated platform at 2 in the morning, walking along the third rail, or that later when she found out was a bit more like, you know, you're killing me. You know, that sort of parental. But she, you know, now she's like, oh, wow, you know, all those years, I didn't know. And,
amazing.
You know, it sort of turned into something a bit more valid and accepted. So.
And what part of New York did you grow up in?
I grew up on the Lower East Side.
Okay, right. So moving around.
And then Brooklyn.
So you're going from the Lower East Side and just basically.
Going global. We went global.
You know, but as a kid, you're just adventuring through the entire city, which New York is, you know, obviously one of the most amazing cities in the world, but can chew you alive, different neighborhoods. I guess could you speak to what that was like going into neighborhoods that were kind of foreign to you?
I mean, I found it amazing. I just never, there was no prejudice to me on color or race or whatever. It was sort of like I said about the movement itself, there is no boundary. We are just people creating, and it was really about the outcome of what we created and the energy we had with each other. So I had friends in the Bronx, and I had friends in Brooklyn, deep parts of Brooklyn, where, yeah, back then it was more of like, oh, you're going out to that neighborhood? But I didn't think of it like that. I was just going to Jason's house. You know, it was more of like I had a familiarity versus, oh shit, I heard Bed-Stuy's kind of crazy. Yeah, but Jason lives on Classen and whatever, you know, it didn't matter. It was like, oh, the train stops on the corner, you walk 3 blocks. It might be kind of sketchy, but I'm a New Yorker, it's home to me.
And you just be innocently getting off.
I just didn't know, I just was sort of.
That's amazing.
And that also was true like at night when you would actually go to the yards or the places where we were painting. It was typically off hour.
Yeah.
You were definitely walking down streets where it's sort of like Mortal Kombat. Where's everybody? Like, oh shit, it's like kind of creepy, but it was very motivating. It sort of kind of kept you like, yeah, right.
That's
Makes
cool.
sense, you know?
Yeah.
I miss those days. I miss the old New York.
Yeah.
You know?
Like the shirt said. What year was like the first like big project? This, I guess, is not a real question
For me?
For you, yeah. Like product-wise, that was separated from the streets. That was like,
wow.
Yeah, this is a real commercial thing here.
I'd have to think hard. I mean, I started making my own T-shirts very early on, and it was only because we were, you know, this is again, you're talking like late '80s. Uh-oh, man down. We're talking late '80s, and you know, I went into a Pearl Paint, which is a famous old school New York landmark art supply, and I bought a silkscreen kit. I was like, oh, what's that about? I'm gonna make some T-shirts, and I really just wanted a Krylon T-shirt. Krylon is the premier brand of spray paint at the time. What we used to use, I was like, yeah, I want to make Krylon T-shirts because you can't go and get them. Much like we like to represent sport teams and things we like. I started just making my own T-shirts of spray brands and giving them out to other friends of mine, and that really sort of led me into like making products.
Get out of here.
Yeah, and so my first venture into products was my own before collaborating with other brands.
Amazing.
It was really building up an identity and getting out all these ideas I had, like, well, you can't buy one, so just make one.
Was there a moment for you that you saw, all right, I'm doing these pieces here, I'm hitting these walls. How can I make these ideas translate to a product, whether it is a shirt or what? You know, was that a conscious thing or a sneaker
I think I Mr. Magoo'd my way blindly into certain things because of the timing. There was not a lot going on around us for reference.
Yeah.
And so it was really early DIY, right? Like do it yourself. You want something, you gotta go and do it.
Yeah.
Like I said, you can't do what we did, and you can't be old school in this industry if you started with an email address, right? You actually, it was a period of time where there was a lot more getting out in the world and doing it. So when we started making T-shirts, or I started making T-shirts, I couldn't send a PDF to a store in France. I had to get on a plane and learn how to say those 3 words, you know, buy me or do you want to buy? And that's my training, was sort of, fortunately, it was a period of time pre-internet that really got me out in the world.
Amazing.
You know, and it's being out in the world that I think has all the benefits than kind of like the 2D flat screen, you're just swiping left. You know, it's a different place where I came from.
I guess as a fan of the products that you've put out over the years, you know, whether it's Air Force Ones to Iversons, like I was mentioning earlier, Bape, you know, what, I guess just speak to me what these type of projects mean to you and how you take what you do and you know what I mean, and funnel them into these, you know, whether it's a sneaker, whether it's a clothing article, whether it's a pen, you know.
For sure. I mean, you know, it's really simple with my way. It's just very visual. Like I said in the beginning, it's always about the outcome. How do, you know, when I look at my kid's math homework, he can look at he's very smart, he can do the math in his head, but the teacher wants to see how you did the math, right? It's always about the equation. And so for me, working with all these different brands, I want to have the same equation I do for my own self and the same energy, but I want to try and place it in to their brief or what's asked of me as the artist, or, you know, the collateral that I need to give back. So it's the same way we used to do when we would go bombing. I'm trying to keep that same energy and excitement on what the outcome would be, you know. And early on, I mean, outside of making my own T-shirts and doing early brands, I did a T-shirt Philly Blunt, which really sort of put us on the map, but it was right when there was no category in the fashion industry called streetwear. They didn't know there was, I think Stussy really opened up the door for the young entrepreneur T-shirt, oh shit, t-shirt into shorts, shorts into pants, oh now you're a brand, and so forth. And so, you know, very early on, I had a little bit of success and a little, because there's not a lot going on. So I'm not patting myself. I just think we were right time, right place. Things that we were doing were relevant on a mass level, and you know, we got accepted. And that's when brands started looking around, like trying to, hey, we want to work with you. The energy you're creating, we can't do with the staff and the people we're looking at it the wrong way. Can you come in and assist? And I think that was the early stage of the early sort of co-branding. It turned a little out of control in the industry where everybody's branding with everybody, everything. But the very initial start of it, it was special. And it can still be special.
The other question I wanted to ask you was the color palette, the Pantones that you've always chosen to work with. Yeah. Was there a particular point that you said, I'm only using these, it's baby blue?
It's like a harbor blue and a gray. I mean,
it is, it's not a baby blue.
No, it's more of a darker sort of.
Was there a point where you're like, these are my Pantones, I'm only sticking to this, I'm not going outside of this?
You get a good recipe, you're going to repeat it, right? If somebody's like, hey, that tastes good, can you make that again? Yeah. And it actually lent itself to a lot of the applications or products or different mediums I was working with.
It still does,
It still does, but I mean, you know, ironically, I never realized where up until recently I started to do a little more self-exploration on, why did I end up on these colorways? And it's, I think, kind of simple answer of the New York City subway car was gray and blue. It was a gray car with a blue stripe.
That's cool.
On top of that, I'm a city kid. So we got gray cement and blue skies. The subway stops were gray cement with blue pole. You know, I don't really know. I'm like I say, I'm just visually soaking things up. I'm not the most literal, articulated sort of person, but I know that I just soak things up as I go along. And the urban decay, the natural erosion of where we live and how it sort of rusts, and I take beauty in all that. And then I just try and pull elements to put into the work I do. So I think that's kind of the origin of that palette. And
was that was it a thing for you to say, I'm not gonna move outside of these colors? If a brand approaches me about said product, this is me, this is Stash?
I mean, yes and no. You know, it's you go to see your favorite band, you don't want to hear their new song. You want to hear the 8 hits that you came to see them for. And they're like, we want to play our new music. You're like, do that later. I want to hear what I want to hear. So you do get locked into a certain pattern, and people do want to call upon that because they think you can transfer the energy to the next product or a different brand. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. I mean, I've done things in red. Stop the presses. I know I'm a blue guy, and it's great to have that because, I mean, it's really weird the impact that I was allowed or what was achieved through some of the things I've made. I laugh when people go, oh, that's a blue thing. Did you work on that? I'm like, wow, that's pretty crazy that I can have any sort of,
That's a powerful thing, though, to be in their colors. You know what I mean? To be able to take ownership of a color. I don't know too many people.
I got given it. It's still, I got labeled with it. So
get out of here.
I'll run with it. I mean, I think the impact I had through I started working with Burton Snowboards, which a lot of people don't know. The early crossover for my own branding was a lot to do with Burton. They had a brand called Analog. I did the AG logo. I did the Analog. I did a lot of ghost designing that doesn't get. It's not a collaborative piece, it's a job. I show up, I do the graphic, I do what I do, you don't claim it. Later you highlight your resume or your design work, but I've worked on a lot of really cool projects and brands. And it wasn't until what the sneaker industry embodied in the youth culture that really propelled that color palette for myself. Because I'd done multiple graph pieces, but the impact that colorway had on the series of shoes I was able to produce with Nike, I think, resonated so heavily that that's what carried the momentum of it.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think when I look back as the sneaker industry as a whole, and especially that specific time period, it was a special thing when no one other than Jordan or people like that got colorways back then. And when I look back at the Air Force, the BW, this was a time period where Jesus Christ, this guy's got his own Nike.
I feel the same way.
Every guy walking down the street right now has one, but that was a time period when it was really, really special. It was a very, it was a special thing, so,
I appreciate it. I mean, it's funny sitting here in an undefeated gym. I mean, talking with James prior and just where we came from is such a different place, and we have such a different, our foundations and our roots are so embedded, and then we look at some of the modern styles and what's happening, it's so different than where we came from. It's totally, it's wacky racers all day long, but it is what it is. But we're still here, and we still represent, and we still have a heritage, and we're happy to still participate, so.
Amazing. So I think there's a lot of parallels between, as we were saying, with the growth of the street artist community, it being going from this in the trenches, street level thing to obviously a much massive, more
globally recognized
thing. So we're now seeing that with esports.
100%.
For you, watching these two communities grow, are there any parallels that speak to you, or the way does the growth resonate with you a certain way?
Oh, it's incredible. I mean, just as somebody who played video games just as a hobby, now to know the sport aspect of it. I didn't really play those sort of games that are in that sport league. I was more of I like games that go like Mario and whatnot. And I'm so fascinated with that. My son at 13 is more invested in those style of games, and just over his shoulder trying to watch, I'm lost. It's too much going on for me. So it's amazing to have, to me it's like we spoke on earlier about graffiti artists coming out of the darkness, because now there's a reason to be seen, not just heard, not just seen. And so I think with e-gaming, it's and just learning, what we learn about the time we live in, it sort of makes sense. And again, 63,000 people can play at the same time, at the same day, on the same, that's fascinating to me. So. And
then as a, obviously we're talking a global community, but in particular for you being a tried and true New Yorker, and now having the opportunity to work with NYXL, which is your city. I mean, that's the home front. That would mean a lot to me, I'm sure.
Oh, it's exciting. I mean, as a Mets fan, just growing up in New York, and just sort of siding on, okay, we got a couple of teams. I've always leaned in the Mets area, and that they own this team, it's just one more layer of like, oh, you have my interest. I'm very fascinated. And then on top of that, learning, our color palettes are very similar. Yeah. We can, it's an easy fit. So, having a conversation, learning about it, being excited, but also being an avid, just being a New Yorker and an avid sort of Mets fan, just not the biggest sports fan, but my teams are set. And so, that they own Excelsior, and the conversation led to me being able to do a mural to celebrate all these aspects that we're talking about, bringing in New York, bringing in, the design, the color palettes, all these things to sort of visually represent it. I think it's pretty cool, and I'm very excited for the upcoming mural project.
So November, New York City, rather cold time.
Let's do it.
Not a better time to be able to work with NYXL for the Shop and Land activation, which is where your mural will be housed at.
Atlantic Avenue. They're going to do a 2-month pop-up, and that's where I'm going to create the mural, and it's going to be incredible. I mean, when just as I'm not a super gamer, but just to be able to roll in on a gaming cafe, and they're going to have Regina's, which is a food vendor from a local market, and it's really going to be a really New York, Brooklyn sort of representation. I'm dying to meet this dude Pine, because it's fucking my head up. So I'm just looking forward to seeing these dudes, and I'll get my game on. Not very good, but I'll jump in the mix. But then they're going to have to paint. Then we're going to have to swap and get them on,
and
see how they do.
I got to imagine for you as a New Yorker that it's got to feel rather good to be able to be part of an activation like this that's inviting to so many kids from whatever parts of Brooklyn, whatever parts of New York, to be able to come together, play.
Listen, like Biggie said, Brooklyn, spread love, it's the Brooklyn way. It's amazing, I do so many activations outside of New York that it is definitely a highlight for me to be able to be part of something celebrating not only the team and the sport, but our borough, and keeping it real and true to that is very exciting. So thank you, New York XL.
There you go.